Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.17 and in this lesson we're going to be setting up our effects analysis project. So what I'd encourage you to do is open up a new blank project if you haven't already and just go ahead and save this as whatever you want. I've saved this as effects analysis. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull out a few samples that we'll be using to test all of the various effects that come with Bitwig Studio. It's very important that you be pretty consistent when you're testing out different effects and going from the unprocessed to the processed or to the affected version of a particular sample. Okay, if you just open up and just pull out anything at random, you're still going to get the gist of it, but you're not going to be able to hear those nuanced differences as you will when you continue to go back and use the same samples again and again. So a very classic sample or sound that gets used to test out effects is a simple drum hit, specifically a snare hit. Sometimes you'd say, why not use a kick drum? Well, a lot of effects we're not really going to be using on our kick drums ever because all they're going to do is muddy things up. Okay, so instead we're going to use a snare drum, and this snare drum is going to be particularly helpful with our time-based effects, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So I've just gone into my browser, into the samples. I've gone into this Nectar's acoustic drums, down to snares, and just pulled one to my liking. Now, when it came in here, I believe it was probably stretched, and I just went ahead and, went into the inspector panel, selected the audio event, and just changed it to raw. But if you wanted to, you could just set it to match the tempo of your project. I set this to 60 BPM. The only reason I chose 60 is because this is what I work at a lot of times outside of my creation stuff. So if I'm working on like a podcast or a vocal recording, I always like to put it at 60 BPM just because that's how I've always done it. And if I go to like the arranger timeline, the times are going to line up. So you can see like this happens at 4 seconds, this happens at 8 seconds, etc. It's just helpful for me in my world outside of this, but you can of course do this at whatever BPM you want to do. I just wanted to explain why I chose 60. Of course, there's 60 seconds in a minute, so 60 BPM. Each beat is going to last 1 second. Works for me quite well. So pull one of these in here, and it will probably come in, and it will just have the sample itself. It may or may not be looped. I'm going to go ahead and just create a little half bar loop here. Just like that. So this is our unprocessed snare hit. And again, many of our effects we're going to test off of the snare. In fact, we'll probably test all of the effects on all of the different clips I bring in here. The next clip I brought in is something that sustains a bit longer. And this is just a simple chord hit. And I grabbed this from the sampled synths folder. And I believe this is the F minor chord. So you can find that on here, or again, you can choose a chord you want. Find something that sounds somewhat consonant or somewhat pleasing to your ear. That's going to be more helpful when we use some of the effects and actually distort this to the point where it's no longer quite so consonant. But we'll take a listen to it. Let's see, maybe I want to put this into raw. Let's see if it makes a difference. Oh yeah, that sounds quite a bit better. So we've set it to raw, but just so I can show you how we can stretch it and basically get the exact same sound, I'm just going to change the BPM down here to 60. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and change this to Stretch HD. And now I should be able to pull it out, and it's going to match what we just had before with it unstretched. Okay, very cool. The last thing I've brought up is a drum loop. Now, a drum loop or some kind of loop is always helpful to test your various effects, just because you can keep it playing over and over again, and you can hear what it sounds like with the effects that you're putting on there. So I went into our, let's see, I'm trying to remember where I went for this. I probably went into the raw cut sampler. Maybe not. I'm not 100% sure now where I got this from. Let's see, I think maybe here. Yeah, I went to the Earth Moments loops teaser. I went to this business class refugees. I just pulled one of these loops in and dropped it on here, something that sounded pretty organic. It didn't sound like there's been too much effects processing to this already. And then I went in here and actually manually stretched this out, okay? So I could get it to sound like I want it to. We can take a listen to that. We already know how to do everything with stretching, so I shouldn't have to review it again. And we can just take a listen to it. And now this is just going to keep looping. Okay, very, very cool. Pretty simple. You don't want anything in here that's already been like overly processed or overly affected, because it's going to kind of change how our effects are going to work with those particular samples. But I guess really it doesn't matter. You can use whatever you want, but I tend to like having something like a drum hit, a chord stab, and then some kind of loop. It doesn't have to be a drum loop. The human voice is also a very good test. So if you just talk and just say something like test, 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 record that in, you could use that as well, and it works. It will work, and it will give you a good sort of gauge for testing the difference between something unaffected and something that has been affected. You might be wondering, why am I working in the mix view and I'm not working in the arrange view or working in the clip launcher view? The reason I'm working in the mix view is because for me, this is the most logical place to kind of transition between these very quickly. So for example, if we have, doesn't matter what we put on here, if we have a filter on here, okay, and I play through these, it's really easy for me to just change. But the one thing I might do with all three of these guys is, I'm going to hold command to select all of these, is go to my launch quantization and just choose like 16th, because I'm not really concerned about how this is working in context. I'm using this specifically as a test, okay? So imagine this is kind of being like a laboratory, and we just have our different, I don't know, elements here that we're messing around with. So now I can go through these nice and quick. Okay, very, very cool. The other thing you need, if you don't have it already, is the span device. So we're going to be using this all the time. And I can even show you a good example with what we just had going there. We had what? We had the filter, and now I can go in and let's find the old Spanorama. Pull it in here, open it up, and we can see the difference already if we turn this filter off as compared to having it on. Okay, so we're going to be using the span all the freaking time in these next videos, especially the ones where we're going over and talking specifically about what some of these effects are doing and how they're working. The frequency spectrum and having a visual gauge of amplitude is going to be huge for us moving forward. The last thing we're going to get is a raw tone. Okay, so we've talked about the sine wave in previous videos, how it's just a fundamental with no overtones. If you haven't seen the video on frequency or on timbre and harmonics, I'd encourage you to go back and watch those videos. If you've already seen those videos, you'll know now why exactly having just a simple sine wave is going to be crucial, and it's going to be so helpful when we're messing with effects, because when we have the span open and we play that sine wave, we can see if we're adding anything to the frequency spectrum and like how much is being added, those sorts of things. So let's go ahead and set up recording just a raw sine wave for ourselves. So I'm going to go into the arrange view to do this. I'm going to go ahead and create an instrument track. On this instrument track, I'm going to go in here and let's see if I can find it. I'm looking for the test tone. It's under generators right now. That's a little bit harsh. If I select command and then click, I can enter in whatever frequency I want. So let's just go with 440 for right now. Turn this on and make sure it sounds like we'd like. I'm going to turn the gain up a bit. Okay, good. Let me go back over to the mix view real quick and stop all of this. I'm going to create an audio track. And on this audio track, I'm going to select the input from my test tone. Post fader is fine in this example. I'm going to now set this one up to record. I'm going to go ahead and mute this track, though. I don't want to hear this coming out twice. And now if I select record and click play, I should get this sound. Here we go. Okay, so I don't need this anymore. I have the clip I want. And now if I go ahead and select Command C to copy, head back over to my mix view and select Command Paste, I should have that tone for me right there. And if I want, I can go ahead and just call this sine tone. I'm actually going to duplicate it. And I want one of these to just be like one bar, and I'll let it loop, I guess. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that and make sure this is doing what we want it to do. We probably were going to get a click every time, but maybe I can, oh, actually it doesn't sound like it. Oh, pretty cool. So no clicking at all. That's awesome. And for this other one, I'm just going to create like a basic stab pattern because sometimes it's going to be helpful to have something that's just like boop, 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 boop to test against. Okay, so let's go ahead, zoom in here on this audio event. Let's close these things down just to help ourselves out. So let's see. It's probably going to be long enough. Now I can go back and just delete this. Let's see real quick what this sounds like. Yeah, that's going to be perfect. As you guys can tell, this is some super fancy stuff, so better be watching close. You might miss something. All right, let's take a listen to that. Okay, I'm actually going to do another version of this. Only I'm going to change this one up a little bit. I'm going to make these hits just a little bit longer. And maybe give myself a little bit more space. So let's go ahead and do that. Sounds like the start of one of those emergency radio broadcasts, right? Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to do. I'm just going to color code these guys up real quick. And this is my long one. I'll start with this color, move over to the white, give this a magenta. It's just always important to make sure you continue to rename stuff as you go along. Good thing I know how to spell tone. We'll call this sine short hits. And this one, sine long hits. Okay, very cool. And now we should be ready to go. We're not going to need this extra audio track. And for right now, we'll go ahead and get rid of this send track too. So if we go back through, let's just revisit the sounds that we're going to be using so we can get them all in our head. We have this snare, we have this chord, drum loop. I'm going to make sure I change the launch quantization to 16s. Okay, perfect. So thank you guys so much for watching. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about how we're going to be breaking our different effects up. So in what sort of groups and categories do all of these effects, and there's a lot of them, where will these go and how can we logically separate these guys out? So thank you guys for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson.